Okay, so let's see how this goes. We ready to go to invite people to join? Are you good to go, Tom?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, Deb, please let in the other folks in the waiting room.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our office hour conversation for the PNM Integrated Resource Plan to follow up on questions that were introduced into the framework conversation as of March 13th. That was our deadline for questions after the previous workshop. And we are recording this workshop, this office hour, to allow us to review it, or people who cannot be here to listen to the conversation. But our plan here, Deb, if you go to the next slide, it's Margie Tatro from GridWorks again. You're tired of seeing probably myself and Kathy Boyce and Deb Shield, our colleagues from GridWorks. We're here with the PNM team in their conference room, and thank you, the stakeholders, for joining us. Today, our objective is to respond to questions that were submitted during and after workshop number 4 by that deadline of March 13th. After this introduction, we're going to go through the document that the PNM team has prepared with responses to your questions. And if you don't already have it active on your desk or on your desktop, Deborah, if you put into the chat, please.
Donald Trump is without a doubt one of the most prodigious liars this country has ever produced. He's our supreme misleader.
We've got some noise on the system. All right, great, we're back. So if you don't already have that document, Deb will put a link in the chat to the document that has been posted on the GridWorks website that has the questions that were submitted by folks. So our plan in going through this document is to give the person who offered the question the first opportunity to get any clarification on the written response that the PNM team has provided. After the person who asked the question has a chance to ask for any clarification, we'll open up the discussion to other stakeholders, and then we will move on to the next question. We have about 6 pages. It's over 20 questions. So we'll ask to keep moving along. I know we have a number of questions at the end of the document that relate to framing stakeholder requested modeling runs. So I really appreciate the PNM team putting some guidance around that. And although many of you know that some of you are already working in small working groups to further parameterize the stakeholder requested modeling runs, hopefully the information that's provided at the end of this document will assist you in moving forward. So with that, we'll adjourn by 2:30 after talking about next steps. So Deb, you can go ahead and take down our slide deck and I will share the document. Are there any questions? Everybody have access to the document called Follow Up from Workshop Number 4, dated 3/11/26.
Margie, I don't know if you can make that any larger. It's pretty small for us. Or I can share it if that'd be helpful.
Let's do that.
There you go.
How's that better?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So Tom Solomon, hopefully you're online. Tom, you had the first question regarding hydrogen cost assumptions. And so, Tom, I'd like to ask you if you've had a chance to read the response to your question and see if you, Tom, have any follow-up to that.
Thank you, Margie. Yes, I did, and yes, I do. So the question is about hydrogen cost assumptions, or at least that's what they state the question is. I'm not sure that that really gets the gist of my query. It was really at its heart about the viability of assuming that hydrogen could ever be used as a fuel for converted former gas-fired power plants. And the point that I made about the pullback in federal funding for hydrogen in the near term doesn't have to do with, cost assumptions out in 2045. It has to do with whether there will in fact be hydrogen infrastructure built at all that would be ready in that time frame, because there is no green hydrogen industry to speak of existing in this country. I looked at, are there any green hydrogen electrolyzer plants existing? And, there's announced a precious few, far less than what PNM would require in that time frame nationwide. If you take all of the announced projects in the current time frame, come close to supplying what PNM would need in that time frame. So I claim, and I believe I am right, that there will be no merchant green hydrogen industry capable of supporting PNM's needs in that time frame, and without federal support in the near term, it will never exist. And I have done a pretty deep analysis of what the infrastructure, the cost of the infrastructure to build it would be required, and it's in the multi-billion-dollar range, at least $5 billion, if you assume you also need battery storage for the green solar to generate it, it doubles. So why would any industry invest, multi-billions of dollars to generate green hydrogen for speculative use by PNM in that time frame at all, unless there was a whole industry infrastructure to support it? I don't think there ever will be. I think PNM's claim that there will be in that time frame is pure fiction. Thank you.
So, Tom, what are you requesting? I know you had a request about a different modeling scenario. What are you specifically, maybe turn it over to Tom, Dwayne, and team. Do you want to respond or add any further color to your response based on Tom's remark?
Yeah, so a lot of things out in 2045 and a little before that are pretty speculative. We recognize that. I guess what we're looking for is kind of where you were going to go, Margie, but what do you want to look at instead? If you're going to assume there isn't going to be hydrogen infrastructure, what is it you're asking? We can look at a different end state potentially in a stakeholder request.
Yeah. I want the assumption to be that there will be no new gas built.
I believe
because
that
there will be no future for it, given the ETA. And you can, if you build it, the ETA will require that it be scaled down by 2045, or if PNM follows through with its commitment to 2040, then by 2040, which means it has a very, very short lifetime. And you're building stranded assets. Why would you do that?
You're not necessarily building stranded assets. We could look at a scenario where you fully depreciate the asset before 2045 as a potential option.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could.
That makes it, obviously, that's not necessarily, that's not going to be as cost effective as assuming it has a longer life, but it still may be cost effective against other alternatives.
Yeah, of course, PNM's got a stated goal to be zero carbon by 2040. So you'd really want to depreciate it by 2040, right? To be self-consistent.
The IRP is looking at being compliant with the ETA, which would be carbon free in 2045.
And Tom, to clarify, is there a scenario that you're doing that's no new gas?
Yeah, we do have that scenario already out there.
Okay, so Tom, is that at the heart of what you're after, is to make sure that there's, to be fully compliant by 2045 of no new gas?
I guess that would be one scenario, and also that any scenarios that do include gas have it fully depreciated before the ETA kicks in.
Okay.
And then Tom, I believe I've heard the team say that at the end, at 2045, you have a pretty significant conversion cost for any gas assets. Can you walk us through that again, please?
You're asking Tom Sullivan?
No, Tom, Dwayne.
No, Dwayne, you,
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry.
Use last names.
Yeah,
Yeah, we assume there's a capital cost that is pretty much all expensed in the final year of the period that is for conversion, and it's pretty substantial.
are you using 20% of the new build cost, which is kind of what the published estimates seem to be?
25. We're using 25.
25% of new build?
Yeah.
Does that apply to all 518 megawatts or just the new build that you do?
It would only apply to a small amount of what we have existing, the LM6000. And then potentially to anything that was a new build.
Okay, so all of what you plan to convert.
Right.
Right.
Okay. But it doesn't include any infrastructure cost to actually build the generation capacity to supply the hydrogen. You're assuming somebody else does that.
Yes, that's correct. And we're assuming that's factored into the hydrogen fuel price.
And do you have a hydrogen fuel price published for that time frame?
Yeah, that's out there. It was in with the other fuel prices for natural gas.
Okay, I don't actually have that at hand. Can you just tell me what that is?
We could certainly look it up and tell you where it is out there on venue. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Let's move on. We have a number of other questions. Thank you, Tom Sullivan and Tom
I'm done,
Dwayne.
thank you.
Yeah, all right. I think given the time frame, we are gonna move on first for the questioners. If we have time from other stakeholders to go back and review some of these question responses, we can, but I think we ought to get through first and foremost the people who've asked the question. Question number 2 has to do with load treatment and Servim. I think Anna Summer was the questioner. Anna, are you on or is your representative on? I know you might have had a schedule conflict. Is Anna here or?
Yeah, I'm on, Margie. And
Oh, hi,
that,
Anna.
that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying.
Great. Okay. Thank you for being here and for the question. Question number 3 is really for us, GridWorks, to be posting, letting the stakeholders know when base case results are loaded into Venue. Tom and Monique, do you all have a sense of timing yet on this? How is it going and when do you think those might be available?
We would expect to start loading stuff by no later than the second week in April, at least a week before our next meeting workshop.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Margie, I have a follow-up question about that. At the last meeting, the March 11th meeting, I think you said at the end of the meeting that the extent to which we talk about stakeholder scenarios would depend on when those files are posted. And I was already feeling like we were not going to be ready for that meeting to talk about stakeholder scenarios. I mean, personally, I can't join it anyway because I have a conflict, but we're definitely not going to be ready to talk about them. And so I just wanted to flag that as a limitation on our end, and I'll let other, interveners or stakeholders speak for themselves about whether that presents a challenge for them too for the April 15th meeting.
Okay, thank you, Anna. We are proceeding with having the working groups talk about what they'd like to explore in a stakeholder modeling run request, but we have not yet announced a deadline for those requests to come in. We're hoping that the conversation between now and the 15th and during April 15th conversation will help narrow those and refine those. So understand the limitation. We're going to proceed forward best we can, understanding that limitation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Great. Okay. Number 4 question was from you, Anna, about gas prices. How does that response make sense to you? Do you have any follow-up on question 4?
Yeah, I think the main question I had about that is just how it will be used.
Okay, hi Anna. So we will provide the base reference case to Siemens, who will do the volatility study on the base reference case, and then they will complete their work and then present it back to this group.
Are you planning to model those like standard deviations or anything like that? Or
You
otherwise
mean inside of Encompass?
Right.
Oh no. No.
Would you do any like post-processing, like changing gas pricing or anything like that with it?
Well, we already have a high expected and low gas price that will be reviewed in the IRP analysis.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so Anna, I can add to that. So I think what we expect to do and how to use that is we expect to see some deviations on the cost to operate the system, and that's going to be driven by gas volatility.
Mhm.
And we will probably put some, probably estimates in terms of cost, how those ranges could change in terms of operating the system if there is volatility in the cost of running natural gas units. So that's just my first thought, but we need to wait to get the results to see if we need to do anything additional.
Okay.
But like Monique said, I don't expect us to pull that information into Encompass or anything like that. We're just trying to see what the impacts would be if there was a lot of volatility in gas prices.
Okay. And so you're mostly thinking about whether that the volatility results would fall outside of the range that you're already modeling in Encompass.
Yeah, we'll have to check that. And,
Okay.
and if it's not, then maybe we need to do some more work, but it'll be likely should be within those bounds of a high and a low gas price.
Okay.
But we can probably talk a lot more about it once we get results and see if we need to do anything different than I just discussed.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We're going to move on to question number 5. I think this is a question that you asked, Anna, but several other stakeholders have interest in this. It's the criteria that's going to be used to evaluate the portfolios. So do you have any follow-up question? Let me go to Anna, do you have any follow-up on this?
Yeah. I guess I'm curious about the way in which you'll think about MPV across the different cases. Sometimes when MPV is the criteria, what some folks will do is model each portfolio that is derived under your different scenario sensitivity assumptions against all the other scenario sensitivity assumptions that you're modeling. You guys have a lot of sensitivities though, so doing that seems kind of intractable. I guess I'm just wondering about like how you would think, how you would compare net present value of revenue requirements for these scenarios which have different, cost drivers, whether because they have a different load number or you know, a different capital cost number, or, you know, whatever it is that might result in different MPVs because of your assumptions and not because of, you know, a different scenario driver that results in a different portfolio. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Anna. You know, we'll have to take those one by one and see what is changing between different sensitivities to see what the cost impacts in terms of an MPV are. But to your point, we're not going to compare the MPV of a current trends and policies case to a high economic growth case.
Right.
It's really apples to oranges there. And so when we're comparing across sensitivities, we're probably going to, you know, the load forecast that we're using or the future that we're using is going to be a big indicator on which ones we can compare against each other. And then to the extent other things are adjusted, if capital costs are adjusted, that's just going to tell us if capital costs went up or down for this technology, this is the type of impact you would see on the MPV.
Mm-hmm. Do you, I'm not familiar enough with New Mexico's IRP rules to know if there's an answer in the rules to this question, but do you have to pick a preferred plan as part of your IRP outcome?
We typically in the past have come up with the most cost-effective portfolio. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's just coming straight out of Encompass, but it could be, you know, also coming out of a qualitative analysis that we do, you know, looking at everything holistically, making sure that we're capturing everything that, you know, just may not be captured in the model.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, generally speaking, I believe we'll be coming up with an MSEP, the most cost-effective portfolio. And then that'll help us drive how we go forward to define a statement of need for the future, and then an action plan that follows with that. You know, how we actually make it actionable for our statement of need.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One thing that would be, I think, really helpful when the time comes to do that is to sort of articulate the criteria under which that plan would change. So we see this a lot more because of all the uncertainty around load. And to give an example, like let's say that your most cost-effective portfolio is a portfolio that's derived under your CTG load case, but you also have a portfolio that you like under your high economic growth load case. I think articulating what would motivate you to select the high growth, you know, portfolio would be really helpful. Like, now we have signed contracts with these loads, and now we're going to choose this portfolio, or we're waiting to see, you know, whether we can bring generation online in time to meet load growth, or, you know, whatever that criteria is. It would be, I think, really helpful to say exactly what it is that you're thinking about that might not necessarily go into the modeling that is motivating the choice of one portfolio over the other.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. I think we're gonna, if we do make adjustments to, you know, what is coming out of Encompass, we're definitely gonna have some detailed description or explanation on why we're adjusting that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's a good conversation that will be later in our workshop series, because others are going to be interested in the results of model, and then what do you do with that? There's quantitative and qualitative criteria that go into that the selection. So that'll be later in our series. But thanks for flagging it, Anna, for now. Does that relate to your question about the synergies between combining scenarios? It seems like we talked about that a bit already.
I guess I didn't really have a question about that when we met on the 11th. I was more thinking about just making sure that the stakeholder scenarios, you know, do something, right? Because you can model incremental resources in any portfolio and have that change really nothing but the cost of the portfolio. And
Yeah.
if you combine those resources together, you're more likely to have things like different portfolio outcomes. So that was the only flag that I wanted to make, is that that's sort of that's one thing I think for stakeholders to think about, but then also, like, you know, as we get to the point of like deciding which scenarios get modeled, it would be helpful to just have PNM thinking about that too, so that they're not just sort of throwing whatever it is they did back over the fence to us and saying, here's the result, it didn't do anything, right? Because I don't think that's the intention that anybody has in suggesting these scenarios.
Yeah, Anna, do you have an example of what you're thinking there?
Yeah, so for example, there's a lot of interest in additional DERs, right? And unless there's enough additional capacity to offset a particular resource that's in your model, I'm guessing that, like a lot of utilities, your model is going to be PRM constrained, meaning that you need to meet your planning reserve margin requirement. And so anything that provides enough capacity to help you fill those gaps is going to be the thing that the model wants. And oftentimes with DERs, they build their capacity value over time, right? So there might not be enough time for them to offset or defer a resource because they're relatively small in nature. But if they get combined with other things, then they're more likely to do that. And so sometimes you have to, I think, just like think strategically about whether the resource that you're modeling would actually fill your gaps, and having your sort of going in position, which you guys provided, I think, in the February workshop, I think is a helpful way to think about that, because then you can see, okay, our deficit in 2033 is going to be 150 megawatts, right? Do we have enough of this resource to actually offset that deficit, such that the model will actually pick it, because it will have to, that planning reserve margin constraint is a hard constraint that has to be enforced on the optimization.
Yep.
Does that help, Tom, Dwayne?
Yeah, I think it does. I guess I'm trying to figure out though, if we can get clear enough input for a stakeholder scenario that defines what additional DER really looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We have to figure out how that affects the model. How would we model that?
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree that that's a challenge. And I think some of the stakeholders have different ideas about how one might approach that. That's definitely one of the reasons that we'd like to see the full results of the MPS, so that we can make recommendations about how those inputs could change. But that's just how we tend to approach that sort of question. But ultimately, like, doesn't really help you guys for us to say, hey, we want more DERs. We need to be able to say, here's how many additional DERs we want and when we want them. And because that's what the model takes, right? It's not a model that's open to suggestion. It's a model that requires numbers. So
Yeah.
Great. And that really is the purpose of having the modeling, the working group starting to talk, and we have not yet figured out how best to connect the modeling team with the working groups to help shape those parameters to best characterize what the group's interested in. That's a next step. But yeah, Anna, thank you for that example. It's helpful.
Margie, before we go on to the next section of questions, in the chat, Tom Solomon, if I could just point you to that, you have an answer there for you waiting on the hydrogen pricing of where you can find it in the venue files.
Thank you. I am in the middle of tracing that down. The information I really probably could have used is the index number for that workbook, but I finally found it. It's 1.4. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian, for providing it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kathy, for follow-up, and thanks, Brian, for getting that real time. We're now going to switch to page number 3 of the response, and the first question comes from you, Glenn. Glenn Wickel, I think you had a question about the parameters for different resources. Have you been able to find what you're looking for? Or Glenn, would you like to respond to your questions 1 and 2?
Yeah, this is just technical stuff. So I did submit a.
Glenn, we can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry. Does this help?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay, good. Sorry, too far away. I did request confidential. I mean, I sent a confidentiality agreement months ago, February 12th, and the confidential modeling section doesn't appear in my venue account. So is this what they're talking about, to contact them to make that available? Because I already submitted the paperwork.
Yeah, and we have not put any of specific modeling data out there yet, which is why you're not seeing the confidential folder. Once that's done, you will be able to see that.
So when will that be published?
We'll put it out there when we put the start putting out case results. We'll make that available to everybody.
All right, thank you very much.
And Tom, just to put a fine point on that, you said about the second week of April, about a week before our next workshop, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Glenn, your next question then was about a stakeholder scenario regarding 4 and 8 hour battery energy storage. So would you like to comment on that response?
Right, yeah. So I get what PNM is saying in their response. I just wanted to point out that I don't think it's as simple as it sounds in their response, because there are a lot of variables. So you could have so-called long duration resources like iron oxide, compressed air, that are being traded off against BESS if BESS prices are high. And even renewables, you can overbuild renewables because they're cheaper than BESS. So there are all these different variables. And I don't think it would necessarily be straightforward to calculate the break. Oh, somebody else is.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Glenn, a little interference. We got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that break-even calculation is necessarily straightforward. However, I will say that I just had a lot of ifs. If this resource is selected and that is selected. So it does seem like the answer to this could be postponed until we see the baseline, because these two things will be included in the baseline runs, the no gas scenario and the with gas scenario. So one could attempt the break even depending upon what resources were selected in your baselines. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think you're generally correct that it sounds like some of what you're looking for really requires seeing results initially. So
Okay, and that will be in the results, the two scenarios you mentioned, the no gas and the with gas, where one could do like a first pass break even like you suggested.
yeah, I'm not sure about that, but we would have clearly the NPV differences between the portfolios. The with gas is just the assumed assumption. I mean, that's a base case assumption, and then the sensitivity is with no gas.
Ben Elsey also has his hand up. I wonder, Ben, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sorry, just to jump in on
Oh, that's
Glenn's
loud.
question. Oh, sorry. What about
You're good.
now?
Go ahead, Ben. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, just to maybe jump in on Glenn's question. I completely hear and understand his comments and concerns on the kind of the what if case. I think, Glenn, to your point, there's a strong expectation that the no gas scenario is going to include a lot of solar storage for an 8-hour lithium ion and not necessarily those other technologies. So I think the assumption is right now you will be able to do that break-even analysis pretty easily. And then, of course, to your point, if modeling comes back somewhat different to expectations, then you might have to do another modeling run. But I think your kind of synopsis of wait and see, and it's probably going to be pretty easy to calculate, is correct.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Great. Thank you. So let's continue. The next set of questions were really some excellent ideas about stakeholder requested model runs. And I think I'll give Tom Duane an opportunity to introduce how these responses were developed, kind of strategically talk about this as guidance in the modeling working groups, recognizing that the base cases modeling results are not yet available. What we're hoping, people are getting started in formulating those ideas, and it looks like that is happening. So Tom, Duane, or Ben, do you want to give any introductory before we go through these requests? And I'll call on the people that submitted them, but is there any introduction you'd like to do before we do that?
So I saw a lot of these as being potentially ideas stakeholders were thinking about, but they aren't specific questions, so we didn't really try to specifically respond to that. We would certainly encourage additional discussion to try to see if those lead to a meaningful stakeholder scenario to look at. And then they have some additional ideas on how to take some of these ideas and help move that forward. But I'm not sure we can really address that in much detail in this discussion right now. It's probably quite a bit more required for that.
Okay, Ben, is there anything you would add?
Not really, Margie. The only thing maybe I would add is, just looking through these requested scenarios, they were kind of the themes that we heard time and time again during the last stakeholder meeting. So I'm hoping a lot of these requests are going to be kind of incorporated into those stakeholder working groups, and that will kind of address some of these concerns.
Great. Okay. So Tom Solomon, let me turn to you because I think the 6, 7, 8, 9, all these 9 ideas were submitted by you. I don't know if you have a priority order of these interests or if you had additional questions. So Tom Solomon, over to you.
Thanks, Margie. I was deep into my hydrogen cost per MMBTU calculation. Let me go back to your document. So you want to refer to which ones again?
So I'm on page 4 of the PNM response, which I'm showing on my screen.
Okay.
There were 9 different topics for possible stakeholder scenarios. And I would like to ask of these 9, we already talked a little bit, I know geothermal is on your mind, but let me ask if you have priorities of these 9 that you would like to talk about, a couple of those, and then we'll then go back to all the other stakeholders on this call and see if they have questions about anything we've covered in this document.
Yeah. Apologies, I have not read PNM's replies to those 9 scenarios. Which ones? So
it's okay, Tom. I mean, you don't have to, but they've been logged into the system.
Documented. Let me just try to answer your question.
Okay.
So what would I prioritize?
Yes.
So, there are a bunch of geothermal ones. I think my overall preference is that geothermal energy as a potential grid resource in the time frame, probably in the early to mid 2030s, which is probably what's reasonable for when they would come online, be treated with the most up-to-date information, which we went through that whole workshop to provide.
Yep.
And I think $6,100 per kilowatt was, the number that we recommended. So if we're going to model geothermal as a resource in that time frame, that would be the number to use. So that's one. And then secondarily, I foresee, a scenario where per the ETA, we will be closing down a number of PNM 6 existing gas-fired generators online. A number of them, I believe, based on my understanding of, subsurface heat maps, for the state of New Mexico. A number of them lie on top of or near some pretty prime geothermal resource potential, providing the opportunity to convert some of those existing units that already have a grid connection and a substation to use geothermal, and that should be modeled. How to go about doing that, I leave to those more knowledgeable than I. But I think that would be, I think that is a likely scenario that should be modeled. I think it will be a lower cost scenario because obviously you don't need to, there's no additional transmission costs required. You're reusing existing infrastructure, so that is cost effective. And I think it is a very likely scenario in the time frame that we're talking about that provides the clean firm that we're looking for. So that's probably number 2. So that, I think that covers the geothermal stuff. I'm looking at some of the others that I provided to you and see what I would. And so number 5 about modeling the cost of solar and battery storage fairly in this time frame. I think it is unarguable that at least up until some recent disruptions driven by U.S. politics, that domestic costs for renewable energy and battery storage have been on a downward trend, and looking worldwide, that continues. And so, in the time frame that we're talking about, there will be a different federal administration with different policies, and I think battery costs and solar costs and wind costs are going to continue to decline. I think Bloomberg New Energy Economies or New Energy Finance forecasts are probably reasonable, if maybe conservative, 25 to 30% drop by 2035. I don't know if that's consistent with what's being modeled, but I'd like to use at least that if we're going to take a look at costs in this time frame for renewable technologies and how well they compete with some of the other alternatives that are being offered. Is that responsive to your question?
Fabulous, Tom. Yeah, I was just kind of trying to calibrate where your priorities were, and let me turn it over to Tom Dwayne or Ben Elsey. Any response or comment on what Tom has discussed just now?
I would think, trying to look at existing plant sites and thinking about those converted to geothermal really needs to be based on looking at where are those plants and what is the true potential there. The vast majority of them we would not think have a lot of potential to be converted to geothermal. Probably some of the stuff down in southern New Mexico could lend itself to that. So we'd be looking
just to
for
clarify, I think the word conversion is not appropriate. It's just to put a new geothermal plant in that location. I'm not talking about taking the existing power plant and converting it. I'm talking about building a new geothermal power plant in that location.
Yeah, that's fine. But I wouldn't see that as being something that's broadly going to work at many locations. So we'd be looking for what locations of existing plants do you think that's applicable to? And some information that helps add credibility to that.
Yeah, and so that's consistent, I think, with the request that's already on the table for the geothermal working group to, provide you with some most likely locations for developing geothermal in the state. And I think we will definitely do that in the coming weeks, which I hope is appropriate time frame for you. And we'll look at those existing power plants as candidates when we review those locations to recommend.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Margie, do you mind if I just add
Yeah,
my 2
please,
cents
please,
on
please,
the
Dan.
reusing existing interconnection rights? So Tom, Solomon, I hear again what you're saying here. Just one reminder, though, as you look at any portfolio across any of these scenarios, there's going to be more new generation being built than existing interconnections. So if you put the geothermal at the point of a retiring gas plant, it means you can't put solar there, or you can't put storage there, you can't put wind there. So if you compare the cost of the scenarios, as long as you're maximizing those existing generator interconnection rates from one scenario to the next, it basically becomes a wash.
Yeah, which just speaks to the need to build more transmission statewide. So if that's a general need, then yes, I agree with you. We're going to need more transmission, no question about it.
Yeah, and I think in Tom, Dwayne, please correct me if I'm wrong here. When you have your new generation resources, you have embedded costs for interconnection and transmission network upgrades. Is there some embedded within those new resource costs?
Yeah, those have to be factored in to adequately compare different options, particularly based on location. Transmission from certain locations can be substantially different than things typically closer to the load center around Albuquerque is going to be lower cost transmission wise. Certain resources that are remote from the loads are going to have higher transmission costs. So we do factor that in.
Yeah, so Tom, Solomon, when you're doing like RFP type analyses and you're looking for real resources, location really does matter. Can you use those existing transmission network upgrades more efficiently? When you start looking at long-term resource plans, comparing large portfolio against large portfolio, you should be maximizing them in all cases, and essentially it becomes, a wash, in those transmission costs embedded within the cost of new resources.
Okay, so a query then. What does PNM use to model transmission costs per mile? If we're going to build new transmission, because if the location for a new plant is going to be out of the money because it's too far away from an existing transmission line, then it would be useful to know that.
Yeah, so we did provide some project estimates from PNM's 20-year plan and put those out on Venue. We didn't put them specifically in a per mile value, but you could get a pretty good feel for what that's going to look like from those project estimates. We did try to provide the mileage with those.
Okay, can you, I'm not that familiar with how to navigate Venue and find stuff. Where would I look?
Is it under the transmission adders? I'll provide that information for you, Tom.
Good. If you can give me an index number, that will really help.
Not a problem.
Thank
You might try to point them to the 20-year transmission plan out there also.
Yeah, great, thank you. I see Glenn has his hand up, and then we are gonna open it up with our last 10 minutes of anybody's got questions about the responses that we've gone over today. So Glenn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, it just strikes me that the embedded transmission costs.
Glenn, we're not hearing you, Glenn.
Okay, so I gotta hold up that mic again.
There you go. Okay, thank you.
So it strikes me that the embedded transmission costs have a very complicated relationship with building at specific sites. So I guess I'm asking, how do you deal with that? So I know you have a zonal model, but you just have a few zones. So within a zone, there might be some good sites, say for geothermal, and some other sites where you have to build a lot of transmission. So how does the model account for that?
So one way it can attempt to account for it is putting in a transmission adder to particular resource selections, which has been done in the past. We were planning to look a little bit more in detail at trying to understand locations and coming up with the cost of projects we would think go along with the location. For certain technologies, there may be 3 or 4 locations you talk about in the IRP, like solar, which can be located in quite a few different areas. Wind has almost always been eastern New Mexico, and there will be transmission costs if there's very much wind added to the system. But we have projects that we expect, including things in the 20-year transmission plan, that we would use for the basis of those transmission adders.
So is the you use the word location and I'm using the word zone, and I think they're synonymous in this conversation. So is it that each zone has its own single adder? Is that what you're saying?
I believe in the past that there was probably a concept where the zones potentially had an adder to them. It may have depended upon the technology. Maybe Shane remembers that better.
That was just tied to the resource in each zone. So a certain zone would have a certain cost for it. That's how it was done in the past. But I don't know, Tom, do you add anything additional than that?
I think some of the things we're doing initially are to just look at the resources and then see where they fall out in terms of just the resource costs, and then figure out where would you put these resources and go back and reiterate on the transmission adders with those.
So is that what you're doing this time around? So when we see the baseline results, you don't expect them to have any transmission adders?
We would expect to at least note that there probably needs to be some transmission adders on those base costs based on where we think the feasible locations are.
So then is that a second phase analysis that would happen later?
Yes.
Okay, I guess we can leave it at that, because there's a whole nother level of complexity, which is maybe the first the first plant has a low adder, and then the second plant in the same zone has a higher adder because you used up the sweet spot location. And we can talk about that later after you go back and add the transmission costs. Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. We totally understand what you're saying there.
Great, thank you. I see
Margie,
Anna. Yeah, I see Anna, you have your hand up. Let me, go ahead, Kathy, you had something first?
yeah, sorry, this is a chat going back to a previous conversation with Ben on the solar and wind versus geothermal and using up the transmission at existing sites. Gwen just points out that geothermal provides more accredited capacity than the wind and solar if you're using an interconnection with retiring gas. Gwen, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
That sounds like Tom might have asked that.
It was Gwen in the chat.
Yeah,
It's
I
Gwen
was
in the
just
chat.
reacting to the comment that, kind of saying that, well, just let the model select resources. And if it selects, cheaper wind and solar, that's equivalent to wash. And I don't think it is, because the model is still going to try and build capacity. And so what Tom Solomon was trying to do was be able to, kind of force the model to overcome whatever barriers might be in there to selecting a clean zero emission capacity resource as an alternative to the gas.
Yeah, so I do have some follow up on that, and we're probably going to need more time, Margie, for this faux answer. So let me give you the short answer now, and I'm happy to take further questions after. One is, I'd say, from a accredited capacity perspective, typically, if you're reusing existing interconnection rights, you don't just put standalone solar or standalone storage. You typically configure those resources to maximize accredited capacity out of those interconnection rights, which is why, for the most part, when you look at surplus interconnection generator replacement, you're looking at combinations of solar, storage, and wind to really maximize accredited capacity of the POI. But my point was on a resource by resource basis, it becomes a wash. My point is simply, under any portfolio, you need to build more generation than interconnection rights that you currently possess. So if PNM use those interconnection rights to build geothermal, they then have to go build additional transmission, additional substations, additional resources at other locations and build out that transmission system. If it's the same, it's the equivalent of putting the solar and storage at those resources and then putting the geothermal at a different location. You still end up with the same embedded generic costs in each of those portfolios. That is what essentially is a wash. So I think my point here is we're really, really into the weeds on like very specific locational requirements. Into Glenn's point, like how much headroom does the system have in certain locations? Just recall that all of this is using generic information, which is kind of best estimates, and all of this will get replaced with real resources that come into an RFP that have real transmission network upgrade costs, that have real locations. So I think if you look at like the cone of uncertainty for geothermal, we're talking about 60% different in capital costs. That's fundamentally going to move the needle. Whether you can save $10 million on generator interconnection rates is probably really, really in the weeds and isn't going to impact the modeling. That's just my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Gwen. Gwen, did you have something follow up?
Just a quick, because I think one of the, outcomes, I think Anna was asking about like, are you going to have a preferred portfolio out of this, et cetera? And we see, other utilities where an outcome of their IRP modeling is, oh, look, this 10 gigawatts or this gigawatt, 10 billion, whatever, $10 billion or gigawatt of gas looks really good in the generic model. Let's go ahead and create a utility bid to develop that project. And so when I'm hearing Tom Solomon talking about these like geothermal ideas where, encouraging exploration of geothermal developments in areas that could potentially be optimal for multiple reasons. What I hear there is, hey, utility, like if you're as a utility considering self-build and your own bids into the RFP, this is encouragement to look at these ideas. And are there geothermal opportunities that maybe the utility is kind of the best candidate to put those bids in, but certainly open to developers doing it. But that's kind of what I'm hearing in terms of these ideas around geothermal development sites.
Tom Dwayne, do you have a response or do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would disagree with anything said there. Whether PNM itself is putting a bid into an RFP is probably something I can't really address right now, or a particular technology. Certainly, the utility has bid into RFPs in the past. Most of the time, we've been looking at bidding in things like natural gas, but that doesn't rule out the possibility to do the same with other technologies out there. So I guess I kind of understand what it's saying there, that the utility might be better positioned to help move certain technologies forward based on sites it controls or interconnections it controls.
Great. Okay. Well, Anna, I know you still have your hand up. Let me go ahead and close out our next steps. And then if you have a minute to stay on, we can take your question. But I know there are many other people on the line, and I wanted to let everyone know that we will be meeting on April 15th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Albuquerque. Encourage in-person attendance if possible. WebEx will be available. You'll be getting more information. Expect to see announcement about access to the base cases modeling results. Thank you for those who have volunteered to start working as working groups in defining objectives for other stakeholder requested modeling runs the best you can. GridWorks will work with PNM to find a way to provide access to the modeling team, answer questions, assist in parameterizing those runs even before April 15th to the best that we can, try to jumpstart that process. The afternoon of the 15th from 1 to 3 p.m. will be the focus on modeling run requests, with the morning having a focus on modeling results. So with that, let me ask Kathy if there's anything else we needed to cover today before we let folks go, except if Anna, if you want to ask a question after we've closed, that would be fine. Kathy?
Nothing from me. No, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time and thoughts. And I feel like we're moving forward and making progress.
Great. Okay. Anna, Tom, do you and Monique and team have a few minutes to take one last question from Anna?
Sure.
Oh, Anna, you've lowered your hand. Go ahead.
Hopefully
Unless-
this is a quick question. I wanted to clarify the conversation, Tom, that you were having with Glenn, and then also partly what Ben just said. I thought the ultimate goal here was to have transmission costs represented by specific transmission projects that you're identifying through your nodal simulations. And I guess the more I think about this or hear you guys talk about it, the more it feels like the transmission needs are really a question of injection capability or interconnection, transmission related needs as opposed to economics. Am I thinking about that correctly? And if not, can you clarify how you are making those decisions?
I think you're right, though. We are trying to be a little more specific on what transmission projects make sense for certain locations. And some of that will be done through using nodal to help derive that, but the zonal model still ultimately dictates because we have to put those transmission costs into the zonal to determine the optimal capacity build out. The zonal model is the one that does all of the capacity expansion planning and comes up with preferred portfolio. So we would have those transmission costs in there before we come up with final portfolios.
Oh, okay. Okay, so those would be traditional transmission cost setters and not connected to transmission project.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anna, for being here and for your questions. And thanks to the PNM team. We will let our other stakeholders log off now. And thanks again, Anna, for your participation.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Tom, Solomon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
So Monique and Tom and Shane and Brian, if you can hang on.